Okay, so in this video, this is going to go over using buttons and colorPicker, because we're going to start using those in our projects. Ways that we can use those. Buttons and colorPickers are useful ways for us to have user input. Okay, so let's go to the references and look at the topics where that would be. Okay, now, when a person pushes a button, that is not something that is going to continuously check. We have the draw function that runs 60 times a second. But when a person pushes a button, that only happens one time. When they press a key on the keyboard, that only happens one time. So that is an event-based function. So let's go into the events. Now, if we are, say, designing something for a cell phone, we might use the accelerometers and stuff to track when we are tilting or rotating the screen or a device to do controls. If we're on a computer like what we are, we usually use something with the mouse or with the keyboards, okay, for being able to capture that stuff. These are event-based. They don't happen all the time. They only are checking when something changes. And we have a combination of built-in functions from the library and built-in variables that we can use and access. Okay. Now there are, let's go back up. There are other things that we can use, like DOM objects. So if we were talking about web design, DOM stands for Document Object Model. Doesn't really matter so much for this course. Just know that, like, if we want to create a button or a checkbox or a radio button, any of that type of stuff, we would go into the DOM section. Okay, so let's look at the button first, because we already have done some components for it. Okay, so a button is something that I would set up, and I would give it a name, give it a position. I could design the look of the button, and I can also design what happens when I press the button. Okay, it's an easy way for us to create something without having to build like a collision layer and stuff, because it just we can use the libraries to make this easier on us. So when I click, it is making changes. And this one is just making changes to the background color. Okay. Now, this is something that when we create the button, now notice that this is a global variable to hold the button. Okay. The variable is holding what the output of is of us creating the button. Okay. The act of create button will create a button. Okay. So when I'm looking down here and I'm reading the description, it says creates a button element in the DOM. Use dot size to set the display size of the button. Use dot mouse press to specify behavior on press. Now there's a lot of other things that we can actually look at, but what it does is it basically returns a thing. It returns an object that we can use. Okay, so we can actually go in and see a lot more of this object. And we've seen that mouse press, but there's also functionality for double clicked. Depending on what it is, we can have it have different things. We could have it where it does something when we press it down, and we can have something when it is lifted up. Okay, maybe it's reversing the colors to show that we're clicking it, and then it's going back to the normal colors when we're done. We can have it where it's detecting when we are hovering over it with our mouse, or we enter into that space with our mouse. There's a lot of things that we can do with this. So this is very useful to delve in, click on the different areas, see how you want to play around with it. I'm not going through a lot of these details in this video, other than we want to be able to position, we want to be able to give it a size, we want to be able to give it some functionality when we click on the mouse, when we click on the button with our mouse. Okay, so let's go back, and we see this button. Now, this is our syntax, create button, and we can give it a label. Okay, and then it has now, this is the first time that we've seen this, but we have an optional, and that's represented in syntax with square brackets. So this is just letting us know that we could give it a value, a default value of the button. Maybe you wanted when a button is pressed that it's automatically adding some value to something, it's tallying up. Maybe you wanted it just to automatically add 1, or you were building some type of like grocery store program where you press a button and it's adding $1.30 into their subtotal because it's adding a can of Coke, and so that button is just a can of Coke. Okay, so we could do that where that button is doing stuff. Now, when we look here at the examples, that dot position, which you would look in the reference, we can set the X and Y value, and it's from the top left-hand corner, and position it. Okay, we can also give it that mouse pressed. So let's play around with this. We'll create a button really quick. We have already played with doing different functions. Now, we got to be mindful of stuff that gets put in the draw and doesn't. If I try to, let's say, create a button, so we need to make sure it's global. Okay, and using what we've seen on there, button is create button. What we've seen on the reference, we're going to go ahead and create this. So maybe click me. Okay, now I want to plug it into some type of functionality, mouse pressed, and I want to say what it needs to do. So this is where I would give the name of the function. Okay, so I could do change background. That's like what we've seen in the example. And then I have to define whatever that function is. So function change background. I have to spell it exactly the same. Now, when you're doing something with a mouse press, where you're adding that functionality, you can't really pass in values for it. So there can't be a requirement that we're passing of like what color or anything like that. You'd have to write it completely different to do it this way. So we could say that we wanted some type of value. Now, if I used a local value here, or let's say we move this, we put it here, and when they press, we're going to just do some random value up to 255 for the background color. Let's see what happens. Okay, there is my button. Now I'm not producing a background when I click. That is kind of working. It's event-based though. It's not changing 60 times a second. It's only changing when I'm clicking. If I put a circle in here, trying to draw a circle, width divided by 2, height divided by 2, and 100. What happens when we run this? We get a circle, and we get it to change color. Okay, this is similar to stuff that we have seen. Notice I don't have anything in the draw on this. Okay, this is one way that we can do this. Okay, so now the draw is, remember that 60 times a second. This is event-based. It's only happening when the button is getting clicked. Let's say that I wanted to have the button move. So let's just put, X. We're going to put an X position for that circle. Okay, so I'll define this X position as, say, width divided by 2. And now when I'm drawing the circle, I get this X. That's what I'm going to use. Okay, so same functionality, everything's working. Let's create another button. Let's create a move button. Move button. Okay, we do it almost the same way. We could do button equals create button move. Okay, so now we want to, we have to write this correctly. That was my mistake. Move button. We want to use, when we click on the move button, to move. So move shape. Okay, so what we want to do with that function, that move shape, we got to define it, is to just add some value to that x. So let's say that x, we're just going to add, now there's a couple ways that we can write it. We can write it like this. We can add whatever the previous value of x is. We can add 1 to that and then store this or assign it back as the value of x. So that means if the original value was 200, then when I would call this would go 200 plus 1, and then it would assign it back to the x, which would make it 201. If I clicked on it again, clicked on the button again, where this function is getting called, then this value would be at 200, 201 plus 1, then would be 202. Okay, so now let's run. I have another button right here. Okay, now if I display, every time I'm clicking, we don't really see it moving. Let's go ahead and try to up this, maybe by like 20. I'm pushing the move a whole bunch of times. Now if I clicked on this to see it again, that's when I would actually see it. So there are times when, so let's say I click it, I'm opening it, now it's showing up, okay? Because it's event based. So even though I was changing it, I was changing the value of x, it's not going to redraw this circle here. Now another way that we could do this to make it so that it's more event based, when I'm clicking the shape but I want to continually see the circle, would be to have something like this. When I click, I can still change the background, but when I click move now, I will see it move. Okay, which would mean if I wanted that background to make it look like the shape is moving, then the background can't be event based. The color would have to be event based. Okay, which would mean that I would have to add another variable. So maybe we call it BG color, and then we give BG color a value. So we're going to move this to before the circle so that we see the circle first. Oops, where did that go? We want to replace this, instead of doing random, we'll do BG color. And then we want to change BG color in the function when we press that button to something else. So this could be random 255. Okay, so now when we run, I got an error because draw is called and BG doesn't have a default value. Let's go ahead and look. It says it's not a valid color representation, line 18. As soon as we get here, BG color doesn't exist right now until I click. So if I clicked, I have it, but I already broke my code. Okay, so that means that in the setup I have to give it some initial value. So it could be BG color could start out as black. So I could say like this. Starts out as black, and then now it's not giving me the error. Now if I click, I'm seeing a change in color. Okay. And if I'm moving, I'm seeing where it looks like the shape is moving, but really I'm drawing the background again, but I'm drawing it based off of whatever the current value of BG color is. Okay, so playing around with that again. We can click this multiple times and changing the color. We can move. All right, doing this. Now, if I wanted to change the positions of the buttons, I have to do it after I created the buttons, but I can just do button dot position and then give it an X and a Y. So let's say I wanted it to start halfway on the screen right here. I could say width divided by 2, that's my X. and then I could give it a Y. Maybe I want to start at 0. So here we go. There's my button. If I wanted this one to be, let's say, in the bottom corner, every button's going to have some type of size to it. So we would, if we're trying to move it, we would have to subtract whatever that size is and then use our built-in variables. So position, and so I could say something like width minus the move buttons dot width. Okay, and that would use the variables of however long this is, those variables that are kind of created. So the width and height of the button is automatically created when we create the button. So see how it moved it over, and it moved it perfectly over because I'm taking whatever size of canvas I have and then subtracting the width of this. So if this becomes bigger, it's keeping it still locked to the right. If I change this size to, let's say, 600, it stays locked to the end. Okay, and then I can also give it a Y value, and I could say height minus the move button dot height, and make it so it's positioned right in the bottom right hand corner. Okay, I can also lock buttons together to position wherever, say maybe I want this one to always be underneath the click me. Let's do that. Let's play around with that. So another way that we could position this is I could take the previous position, the previous X and the previous Y of this button right here. So I could say this button. I want my move position of it to be the same as the other buttons X, so I could say button X, and then I could have the Y, well, I want it to be below it, but I want it to be like hooked together, so I could say button dot Y, so that would be this button's Y position plus this button's height. Okay, so button dot height. Now if I run, now the buttons are locked together, which means if I put this to a different value, this one will automatically move with it. That's why we want to use variables. That's why we want to create this stuff like this. Okay, that's it for doing a button. Now let's do colorPicker. So let's go back and look at some of the other ones that we have. Oops. So colorPicker is a fun one. Sliders is also a really fun one. Create colorPicker. Okay, colorPicker is the little things that you have to change colors of stuff. Okay, so maybe we want to create a drawing but let the user have choice on some of their base colors. Okay, so we could do this. We can have this colorPicker open up and let them check. So this is the syntax that we would want to write, but we're going to have to give it a couple things. So we create a colorPicker. The dot value is how we can return whatever that color is for hex code. Now for RGB, we like the dot color. Okay, you can use hex, but because it's a 16 number format instead of 10, because it's base 16, it's a little bit more difficult to understand like how bright I want a specific color, and so you're kind of guessing. I find that RGB colors, since each channel, the red, the green, the blue, all go from 0 to being none of the color to all of the color at 255, that it's a little bit easier to try to determine colors and play around with your colors. So we use the dot color to return a color, and then we can use that. So we're going to adapt some of our code. So here, all we need is to create the color picker, and we could actually give it a default color if we wanted. Okay, And we can still position it, and we can size it, and we can do all of that stuff, but it has to be a global variable. Okay, now let's start playing around with that. Okay, so we have a couple buttons. Let's do color picker. So color picker will create color picker. Now if I do this, there it is. It's just going to default to black. If I wanted it to, let's say, default to red, I find the RGB values are the easiest. Okay, I can use that color object. So this is red, full channel of red, no green, no blue. Okay, if I wanted to position it underneath the move, I can do that. Okay, so I could say the move button, color picker dot position, and then I can say move button dot X. Actually, yeah, well, that would be fine. And then move button dot Y plus the move button dot height, if I wanted to keep it tight to that button. Okay, so there it is. Now I want to use this to color this circle. So here we have our circle. We want to create some fill, and then we want to do that. So this color picker, I've created it. I don't have a function that I'm doing for it, but if it's something that I need it to update all the time, I could put it in where it's kind of inside the draw if I have something that I want to be super dynamic. Other times I could have it where maybe I want it more event-based and it's linked to a button or something like that. In this case, let's just make it super dynamic. So we're going to just call that object, okay, using the variable, so color picker, and then we're going to say dot color. Now let's run. Now it defaults to red. We can go to green. We can drag this around. Okay, it works because I have this inside of the draw that's doing 60 times a second. If I was doing it with a different color, okay, maybe I'm doing let circle color, and I give it some different, default value. So the easiest way is I could just give it the default value here after the color picker has been created. Circle color equals color picker. Color picker dot color, and then I could change this to circle color. Now when I run this, okay, it is red, it is not changing. Okay, if I want it to be event based, maybe when I'm changing the background, that's when I want to update whatever this color change was. So when I click on the click me, I want it to randomly change this background to some grayscale image, and then I want it to pull whatever value from the color picker. So I could say color circle color is equal to the color picker dot color. Now it's event based. Okay, it will, so let's say I go to blue. Okay, it's blue, it's still showing red. I can move it, it's still showing red. When I click on the click me again, now it's going to pull that updated color from the color picker. If I want to go green, I can do the move, it's not going to do anything. I could change colors, all over the place. It's not going to update, but as soon as I click on the click me, then this is getting fired, and this statement is running, and then it is updating. Okay, so that is how we would use the color picker and the buttons. Now this is just a preface to show how this is starting to get pretty big. We have a lot of global variables. So we are actually going to start learning how to create objects ourselves to make it so that we have less variables all over the place, because it starts getting harder and harder to manage. All right, good luck. Have fun.